John Yarmuth, and it's time for Straight Talk with Milt. Of Straight Talk, my guest today is the one and only, the legendary, the inimitable Milton Metz.
Thank you, John.
Welcome. You know, it's a good thing that we know each other and have known each other for a while, because if I had not known you and considered the prospect of talking to someone who had done interviews for 30-something years, I don't know how many thousands you did, it would have been a daunting task.
Oh, I've been in conversation with you, John. You can hold your own very well. But it's interesting. The interview sequence is very interesting to observe. Who's good at it, you know, who's not good at it, the do's and don'ts.
I guess since you have been off the air for a few years anyway, at least in terms of your role with WHAS Radio, we ought to introduce you again. For 34 years, the host of Metz here on WHAS Radio, and then also the host of Omelet on WHAS Television, correspondent for WHAS Television during the Derby for probably that same length of time. So
I also have a claim to fame. I was Squire Snoopy McSneer on T-Bar-V. Did you know that?
No, I didn't know that.
I must have seen I was the house villain.
Oh, wow.
And I'll tell you, well, you go ahead.
No, I'm fascinated.
Well, it was a very benign show, and Randy and Cactus were beloved of the children, but they needed an antagonist, and those were the days where if you got a part on TV, you made a few bucks extra. So I schemed. I wondered how I could get on to do something, and I said, "You need a villain." So I got my wife has a real tall girlfriend who gave her a velvet prom coat that stretched from my shoulders to my shoes. So it was very sinister looking. Got a big handlebar mustache. From my hat collection, I got an old top hat and made big sideburns. And I said, you know, I'll be the bad guy, which they liked. We had many mishaps, but they always tripped me up because they were the good guys. And my career came to an end once when I stole Santa's reindeers. I had found out Taylorsville Road somewhere, I think it's gone now, a bunch of Japanese miniature deer, maybe 50 or 60 of them some guy had in his yard. So I plotted, I thought a real dastardly deed was to steal the reindeer. So I came out there one day with a loaf of bread, and I threw some over the fence. I didn't get in the fence with them. And all the deer came to me. And I was in garb, and there was a cameraman there. And all of a sudden, when the deer were there, I threw up my arms, and made some noise, and they ran across the field. Well, that was the sequence, was that I had corralled them and sent them away. But the only trouble was my boss had a couple of young kids who wept. And he scared the hell out of them. And so that was the end of Squire Snoopy McSneer.
Well, that's a part of Louisville history that I didn't know.
Well, I think
sure
I could live without it. But
No, it's fascinating. The reason I wanted to talk to you today, twofold. One, I wanted to talk about talk radio and how that's evolved from your days on it. But I also wanted to talk about the Bingham family, because last week when Molly Bingham went through her ordeal and was finally rescued and found to be okay, there was a couple days of talk show discussion in which there were a lot of calls antagonistic to both Molly and the Bingham family from people I know who didn't know them. And it occurred to me that there are a lot of people in this community who don't understand what the Binghams have done in the community and where they came from. And I thought it'd be interesting to have someone who worked for them for an awful long time and knows them both as a boss and as a member of the community to talk a little bit about what the Binghams have done in terms of journalism in this community.
Well, I think they raised the bar pretty high in journalism. They were really good journalists, and they were pretty good bosses. They didn't pay us a lot of money, I must say that. But as far as fairness is concerned, as employers go, you could get in to see the top guy if you wanted to do that. There are not many companies today where you could call on the CEO if you were, you know, a peasant working in the lower ranks. I'm not here to defend the Binghams. Their record stands for themselves. But they've given millions of dollars, some known and some unknown, to very good causes here. And at one time, I think they have a pretty good newspaper today, but at one time they were, you know, one of the top 5, 10 newspapers in America. They won their share of Pulitzer Prizes. And rather likable people without artifice, you know, without guile.
I think it was interesting during one of the programs the other day when a lot of this talk was going on. Tom Wills, who was doing the weather cut-ins, talked to John Ziegler and said, "John, it's a good thing that the Binghams still don't own WHAS because you might not have a job." And I was, what would you say to that?
Absolutely not. They might not like it, but his job would not be in jeopardy. That's what makes them made them such good publishers and employers, that they have had a couple of guys who wrote editorials exactly opposite to what they believed, and they published this guy who worked for them and took their money, and he wrote an article against the stand they did, and he stayed on his job. And I think that happens very seldom. As far as Molly Bingham goes, I was very amused and somewhat surprised at some of these attacks on her. I mean, she's a serious photojournalist who has put herself in harm's way, not for self-aggrandizement, but because she believes in what she's doing. I guess she could with her resources, although I don't know, you know, whether her father shared any of the big bucks with her. But she could be, you know, down in Palm Beach or in the Bahamas. Instead, she's gone to some of the real tinderbox places in the whole world to get a photojournalist's review of it. So I think in any other neighborhood, on marking her absence and return, there would be yellow ribbons on the trees. So I'm really confused as to why people would have anything harsh to say about her. She worked for 2.5 years for the Vice President of the United States as a photographic documentarian. Well, those are tough jobs because you're working night and day, and nobody knows who you are, and you wind up with thousands of pictures for the historical record. So I think she's to be taken seriously, and I, for one, am just delighted that she got sprung.
It's obvious to me anyway. It may not be obvious to you or to anyone else, but that part of that is because of the audience of WHAS right now. It has become, and I assume her identification as a liberal and as a member of the liberal media. I want to go back and kind of trace the history of WHAS and talk radio, because you are a pioneer nationally in talk radio, and kind of what talk radio, how it began, what were the concepts initially, and how it's changed into more of an agenda-oriented medium.
I'm not sure I'm a great historian on it, but my understanding of how talk radio came to be was sort of a defensive, aggressive reaction to the inroads that television made. Radio used to have radio drama. Well, when the soap operas came on and you could see the actors, then great programs like Lights Out and even some of the radio soaps fell by the wayside because people then could see it. Music continued to be very strong for two reasons. One, it's records are cheap, John, and they could do that. TV couldn't just play records, you know. You needed an image, but they needed something else too. And it started off years ago when there wasn't a two-way. You couldn't hear the phone. So some guys who were the early talk show hosts would answer the phone and repeat the question. It's a little cumbersome, but it was the pioneer work to it. Then it became a staple. Now, I had made the comment once that I thought one of the reasons they did radio talk was that it was cheaper. A guy I worked for called me on that. He said, the equipment is expensive. I'm not sure that's true. I think once you get the equipment in there, and this gave the listener a great opportunity to express himself, to use a fancy word, vox populi, the voice of the people. And that was very good because a lot of people in this world are lonely. They may not have someone to talk to. They may be married to somebody who doesn't give a darn about what they say, or they work with somebody, but they have opinions. And so talk shows became a very good outlet for it.
What was when you began this this venture here, what was kind of your concept? How did you see your role? It certainly wasn't an ideological agenda.
No, there was none. Was to survive each night. Because sometimes you had mishaps. Sometimes the phones went out, and that was like dancing with Hitler, you know. I mean, you had a phone show talk show, and your phones didn't work. And the management was a little slow in fixing it up. Or you may pick a topic that didn't get a big response, or in the beginning people didn't know about talk shows. I remember my very first one it was a pretty good topic and got me off to a good start. Should Khrushchev be invited to the United States? Remember, he came here and he pounded his shoe at the UN table. Well, that was a good, lively topic, and that got me off to a good start. And at that time, instead of being called Metz here, our company didn't believe in the cult of the personality. They wouldn't put a personality's name on it, so they called it Juniper 52385, which was the phone number. And the only thing that saved me, my wife came up with the name, was when they took the prefixes off, no more Juniper or Walnut or Chestnut. They needed a new name, and my wife said, well, suggest this, and they liked Metz here, it was called. But things have changed over the time. When I did it, and I think most talk show hosts then, were down the middle of the road. You would put up a topic, sometimes political, sometimes domestic, you know, about husbands and wives getting along, or how to get a girl to like you. I would do that. I didn't do politics all the time. And if you hit a wrong topic, you would suffer from it. You wouldn't get a lot of calls until to build up an audience, and they would call. But in my way of thinking, a talk show means talk from the audience. That has evolved into something different in more recent years. More recent years, the talk show hosts have their own agenda and come on very strong. And I have found two things with today's talk show. Not great finding on my part. One is they're usually against something. It's a rant of some kind. And the second one, and this is one I had trouble with myself, admitting you're wrong. They say that the two toughest things that a human being can say, it's hard for him to say, is, I love you, and I was wrong. I don't know whether you agree with that or not.
Pretty good one. So it's a good time to take a break, though, and ponder that. We'll be back with Milton Metz talking about talk radio when we return from these messages.
No.
Welcome back to Straight Talk. Our guest is Milton Metz, longtime radio talk show host and local TV and radio personality. Welcome back. Talking again about the history of talk radio, I take it that politics has always been a staple of talk radio, but just without the agenda, without the orientation, ideological orientation.
It was always a good topic, but nowadays it's virtually 100% politics. Early on, there used to be a pioneer talk show host, was a guy named Joe Pine, had a wooden leg, was very aggressive on the air, but he didn't get into ideology, he didn't get into partisanship, but he didn't suffer fools gladly. So he would insult guys he thought weren't good. He would say something like, I'd like to put some stamps on your forehead and mail you to a forest fire. he would tell a caller, or he says, your intelligence is no more attractive than your personality. Goodbye. And because he was first, he didn't do it with the elan that Don Rickles did. I mean, he was really a mean SOB, but he was very popular. But then, and then guys, there was a guy named Barry Gray. I once saw him down in Miami Beach, and he would take questions from the nightclub audience, and was a very amusing, very intelligent guy, and would talk about politics and so forth. The big change has come about in that talk show hosts have their own agenda, their own biases. And it seems to me that it has a chilling effect on the callers. It's very popular, I'd be the first to admit it. But what happens is that if you listen to these with strong personal agendas, without, I don't want to mention any names, some people I've worked with, and it wouldn't be wise or diplomatic, but the point is that if you listen to them, you'll find that 80 to 90% of the people who call in are in agreement. You're preaching to it. It has a chilling effect on others because according to who the host is, they'll either deny that they've said something, or they'll make you, or they'll laugh, or they'll make you feel that you've come up short, or whatever. Not always, but sometimes. And so I think it has a chilling effect for the opposition viewpoint. I think the difficult thing that I did when I was on, and I don't know how successful I was to be firm without being, and being easy with people without being a complete wimp, so that if somebody said something harsh, you let them go. But if I heard something that I thought was a lie or libelous or slanderous about somebody, I would call them on that, because it didn't seem to me. See, one of the great refuges of talk radio is that you don't have to identify yourself. So you can call up and say the most outrageous things, and there's no payday for it. Well, I'm for free speech, and I say, okay, go ahead. But that's the drawback to it, that people can say unsupported statements that they don't necessarily have proof for unless the host calls them to account.
One of the things, obviously, Rush Limbaugh having the largest audience of any radio talk show host these days, with some 17 million viewers, but he doesn't take many callers. I mean, his is basically a 3-hour monologue. And, but he obviously is influencing a lot of people in the business.
Yes, of course, he wrote a new chapter in radio talk shows, Limbaugh does. But there is the suggestion by some that if the proponent has such strong views, who needs the audience? Let him come up and give him a monologue, give his long speeches and the provoking talk that they have. There's no denying that those are very popular today.
It changes kind of the dynamic of the, I guess, the listener and the host, because you become passive at that point. It changes the purpose of the show, I would think.
Well, it's all evolved, and the fact that it's successful and commercially successful means that it's going to be around a while.
Right. Now, there's talk of a group out of Chicago that's trying to start liberal talk radio, a network. And there's been a great deal of debate. I've been involved in it with John Ziegler, too, about why conservative talk radio works and why liberal talk radio has not so far caught on. Do you have any theories on that, or do you reject the premise? Would you mind?
Well, maybe they haven't got the right person yet. I don't know. I don't know who they're talking about. The comic writer
Al
Franken, who wrote the book Rush Limbaugh is a Big Fat Idiot or something like that. I don't, that name calling's not going to carry the day. They said they got together, John, $10 million, which for Rush is chump change, as Catherine Zeta-Jones said about a $100,000 purchase. She said that's pocket money. Although with her beauty, you could forgive her anything.
I would. Well, another issue that comes up is the notion that when people say, well, Rush Limbaugh's out there influencing people, and he says, well, I'm just an entertainer, and which seems to be designed to absolve himself from normal journalistic standards of factuality and so forth. What about that issue of whether talk radio is entertainment or so forth? Certainly, I mean, did you perceive yourself as primarily an entertainer, primarily a journalist, or what did you perceive your role to be?
I think it was a mixture. I tried to follow certain things that journalists stand for. I try to be objective, try to be truthful, but mindful of the fact that we had a lot of advertisers who wanted audience, and so there's an element of entertainment too about it. Now, I don't think Limbaugh is an entertainer. Absolutely not. Although I think at times he is very entertaining, but I don't think that's a definitive statement about him. Mm-hmm. He's too powerful. He's too opinionated, if you will, and is very successful. But yes, he can make you laugh sometimes. But then he's one of a kind, really. Although there are a lot of Limbaugh wannabes around the country too.
Mm-hmm. Again, I've had numerous conversations with John Ziegler about this, but when he talks about that, it seems that there's a difference as to what your perspective is, because you can, as the host or as the ideologue, depending on how much you're involved, consider you may intend for it to be consumed one way, but you have listeners on the other end who are consuming it a different way. Or, I mean, they may be entertained, they may think they're listening to fact, even though you may not think it's fact.
That's right. Take, for instance, I had a little conversation with John in passing once about the Augusta golf thing, which is probably small potatoes. I mean, golf is, I know it's important to you, but it's not it's not as important as your family or the Saddam Hussein conflict or any of those things. Nevertheless, it takes some of our time. And I made he's a golfer and he's pro-Houthi and believes that women don't belong there if they don't want them, because it's a private club, and that's a point. But I made this point to him, which he rejected. This was just in a conversation. Our desks are near each other, and when I'm not on the payroll at WHS, but I have an office, and they let me come in and use the phone and a copier. But I said that that's well and good for a private club. But if there was a fire at Augusta National, the fire department of the city would come out there, and who's paying the taxes that supports it? Everybody, blacks, whites, and women, and Asians, and minorities, and everybody. And for that reason, it has a public aspect to it. And I felt the same way about restrictive country clubs in this area, that if there was a crime out there, and I hope not, you would have the county or city police or the state troopers there, and we pay for them. And by we, I mean all of us. So there's that aspect to it, against the argument that you should associate with only the people you want to. I have a brother-in-law I'm not too happy to be with, but he's in the family.
I had the privilege of doing your show a couple times, and I remember in the studio so well this map on the wall, and with pins from every place that had called you, and there was virtually no place in North America that had not called you one time or another. And one of the things that intrigued me about that was, in terms of deciding what to talk about, your audience was primarily local, but you had, I mean, I know that WHAS still shows up in the diaries in 7 or 8 or 9 states. And how did you work that out? How did you consider those people who were not in the immediate market?
I tried not to get too local, like should there be a traffic light at 22nd and Broadway, you know, that would be of only interest to that. Incidentally, I have that map at home with all those pins. And one time the station bought me a new map, and I had to transfer thousands of pinheads, not people, but pins, to the new map. I still have a dimple in my thumb from putting it in there. But it was exciting because the station's so powerful. I remember once there was a tornado in Charleston, South Carolina, and their power went out, their radio stations went out, and our station was so powerful that we had local calls from them. I remember during one of them, a mother huddling in the attic with her two little children, calling Louisville, calling us, and we were able to relay something to it. That's when radio was exciting. Or, you know, the night of the, I was up all night with the tornado in '74.
What, over all those years, there must have been some topics that whenever you brought them up, the phones lit up, and we just have about a minute and a half left, but I want to, the topics that always, without fail, generated the most interest.
What's your three-letter word ending in X? Sex. Sex was always good. Because I had some wonderful people who were they weren't clinical, they were PhDs or doctors, and they talked frankly about sex. And nobody ever talked about sex on local radio like they did. And occasionally I would get some calls. But they talk about the most intimate things. People will tell you things, John, in public about their sex lives. They won't tell you about how much money they make, but they'll tell you about their sex lives. One of my favorite ones was, how do you get a girl to like you? I've been trying to find that out for 50 years.
You never got any good advice?
Well, I never found out, let's put it that way.
Just a few seconds left, but the standard. This we talked about avoiding cliches at the beginning. We weren't, but the best and the worst interview you ever did.
Walter Cronkite was the best because he was funny and he was loose, and he didn't, even the first time he met me, he didn't have any airs about him. He's that kind of a person. The worst was, well, Rock Hudson turned me down, but he died 3 months later with AIDS, and so I didn't feel bad about him. But some Hollywood queens who had double chins would duck me, you know.
Milton, thanks very much.
Thank you,
It's been a
John.
great fun, and appreciate seeing you again.
Always enjoying being with you on and off camera.
All right. Good to see you. Thanks for being with us, and we'll see you next week for another edition of Straight Talk. Take care.